There's a lot of things you've probably been told about mushrooms that are wrong. So today we are looking at the top mushroom myths, the lies that you've been told about mushrooms. And I'm here with herbalist Robert Rogers. He's going to give us the lowdown.
All right. Well, hi, I'm Robert Rogers. I've been a clinical herbalist for the past 50 years, clinical professor at the University of Alberta in family medicine, author of a number of books on medicinal plants and fungi.
When you go through and you talk to people about mushrooms, what do you think is some of the biggest misunderstandings people have?
Well, I think the biggest one, it goes back to when I graduated with a bachelor degree back in 1970, mushrooms didn't even have their own kingdom. They were classified in plants. So with regards to science and moving ahead, very few people know much about mushrooms, or if they do, they were taught, well, don't eat those, or a little bit of fungophobia going on in North America. So I think the first thing is that many mushrooms are edible, and there's lots of jokes and gallow humor around mushrooms, like you can eat any mushroom once, right? Or there's bold mushroom hunters and there's old mushroom hunters, but there's no old, bold mushroom hunters. And so I think the first thing is helping people to overcome this and feel comfortable. And the only way to do that, really, you can't do it through books. I think you have to go out your local mycological club with people who are expert, and then learn 5 or 6 a year, and learn that way by really seeing them in situ. I think that's the best way to learn. Yeah.
Right. So do you encourage people to touch and feel and pick and like smell and lick? Because you're trying to dispel of the myth. What is your philosophy on
Yeah,
mushrooms?
I think you can do any of those. People go, some of the amanita are quite deadly poison, but you can handle them and you can taste them. Don't ingest them. But I think the sensory part, particularly many mushrooms have a particular smell, like the inosopes. This is a funny story. So I was taking a group at one time, about a dozen people, and there was a mother and her 16-year-old daughter there, and so I picked an inosope off the ground, and I said, here, I passed it around, I said, here, everybody smell this. And it goes around, they're smelling it, and the 16-year-old daughter smells it, and she goes, oh, it smells like sperm. And the mother who's standing right beside her goes like how do you know? So, great identification, but if you don't do the smell test, I think you're missing a lot of how you learn about mushrooms, yeah.
And are mushrooms safe to, not ingest, but, taste with the tip of your tongue? So that's not a dangerous thing to kind of taste
a lot of the russulas, a lot of these, gilled, waxy kind of, but red capped, there's hundreds of them. If you taste it a little bit and it starts to get quite hot fairly quickly, you probably know that you're dealing with something that is not edible. Although a lot of Eastern Europeans, they'll take every russula and they'll boil it up and they'll pour the water off and do it again, and I go, why bother, right? We're talking survival as opposed to enjoying a great mushroom treat, right? Yeah.
You have really explored the medicinal aspect of mushrooms, not just eating it for a delicacy because it tastes good. What are some of the myths around medicinal mushrooms? Because I find that fascinating. I make a lot of YouTube videos, and in the comments, people are all over the place, and I want to be like, I don't think that sounds right, or this doesn't sound right, but maybe we can dispel the myths right now, because you know what some of the big ones are.
Well, I think one of the big ones is that all medicinal mushrooms are edible. We know that's not true if you've ever chewed on a turkey tail. The other is that all medicinal mushrooms can be taken safely with pharmaceuticals, and there's a number of contraindications. Even reishi, the Ganoderma, they tend to have some blood thinning properties and shouldn't be taken with Coumadin or warfarin or one of these rat poisons. They should not be taken at the same time due to danger of bleeding out.
Okay, well, see, let's explore that one because I find that fascinating.
Sure.
I have a whole package of medicinal mushrooms that I've been using. And it seems like you shouldn't just start taking them randomly, that you need to understand a little bit about what you're taking. Like is there some rules of thumb? How do you know which ones you should take and which ones you shouldn't?
Well, you could read my book.
Read your book. Okay.
But,
so you have a list in your book or something?
Yeah, and you should look it up because there are a lot of great medicinal mushrooms and they do have little contraindications. For example, one of my favorites is turkey tail. And taken over a period of time, the melanin pigmentation will increase and turn your fingernails a dark brown, which is not really harmful and goes away once you stop taking them, but for people who don't know, that's a big issue. Other mushrooms should not be taken with certain drugs, for example, with cardiovascular drugs or something of that. So I think it's really important for people to understand the benefits and also the detriment for just charging ahead and eating something without knowing what you're doing. I mean, even oyster mushrooms are a really rich source of lovastatin and other compounds that really help to lower blood cholesterol levels. And so, would you want to do that with a drug that does a similar thing? And so, it's a tricky thing because, generally speaking, people who are into all things are natural, they're all safe. That's not true. And then the other side is going to your medical doctor, and they're going, "Oh, don't take anything natural," because they're not trained in it. They don't know, and they'll often prescribe drugs that they haven't even taken, and those all have side effects. There are all benefits and risks with all pharmaceuticals.
Right.
Yeah.
And so now that's really fascinating because you just pinpointed the two opposite sides.
Right.
Is people who say everything from nature, it's got to be good, and then the doctors who almost, well, with some exceptions, seem to lean on the side, if it's from nature and you just picked it out of the garden, use that hesitantly, maybe in a tea, but that's it.
Right.
Something like that.
Right.
How do you approach those two? I mean, because I love your scientific approach, and I'm trying to pull people in the middle myself, because I feel like those two extremes are too far. How do you address that with people?
Well, I think I've spent the last 40 years of my life trying to promote the concept of integrative medicine, and in my position in faculty, you know, I'm probably one of 70 professors who actually are trying to find that medium place of where we can have an honest discussion about the good and the bad. And it seems like two different worlds that are very, very difficult to bring together. I think there are places to do that. There are countries in the world who do that. But North America seems to be dominated, at least the last few generations, with a drug mentality. Oh, well, you need a drug for this, or you're deficient of that drug. Well, that's so ridiculous. But I think because biomedicine and big pharma are too closely cozy, things need to change in order to help really benefit people. I mean, in clinical practice, I would see people who have taken up to 14 different drugs at the same time, 14 drugs, and trying to wean them off of those and move them in a healthy place of better diet and removing those. So that's a very complex thing that most herbalists and most naturopaths or medical doctors are not really proficient to deal with.
And so, do you recommend to people to take mushroom supplements regularly?
I used to. I had a clinical practice, and I haven't done that. I haven't done clinical for about 20 years. But I do recommend, I teach and I train people. I do believe that there is a need for actually medicinal mushroom clinicians. There is a program in England right now that's starting to be developed which is a 70-hour course, which is better than nothing. And I'd like to see something like that in both Canada and the US, where people, say a naturopath or an herbalist, want to actually work more intensely with medicinal mushrooms, they can get the proper training. So it's not, takes out the guesswork. And what mushroom is good for what cancer, or what blood sugar issue, or whatever, or what liver issue. And so one of my books I wrote a few years ago, Medicinal Mushrooms, the Human Clinical Trials, looks at a couple of the 100 clinical double-blind studies that have been done with humans. So it gives us a start to figure out how to do this. Yeah, yeah.
And okay, so let's talk about the clinical trials, because I feel like I've been trying to encourage people to start taking mushrooms, especially the, say big half dozen medicinal mushrooms. They seem to be super beneficial. And I can talk about, what to me is the benefit. What do we know with humans? Like, what does the science say about medicinal mushrooms?
Uh-huh. Well, that's a big topic. I'll try and keep it as short as I can here. I would say, for example, most of the medicinal mushrooms, the studies and human trials have been done with the fruiting bodies, which were the traditional method. And, thousands of years ago, traditional Chinese medicine was using mushrooms. But there are exceptions. And so the world out there going, oh, mycelium versus fruiting body, it's kind of a moot point, because turkey tail out of Japan and China, where a number of the human clinical trials have been done, that is actually a fermented mycelium product. It's not from the fruiting body that you pick in the woods here. And so this idea that you have to pick fruiting body or mycelium, and you have to pick one of those worlds to support, is crazy. Both are good in their own context.
Okay, so turkey tail seems to be beneficial. What do the studies say?
The studies say that it's remarkable. The study that I often cite that I think is useful is they took several hundred, I think up to 400 patients who had colorectal cancer. So they did surgery, they cut out the cancerous part, resected up the intestine, and then sent them home. And half the group, they gave turkey tail extract, very small, 1 gram twice a day. The other group, they gave a placebo. And then they followed them for the rest of their lives. And the group that received the control placebo lived an average of 4.6 years after the surgery, which is right under that 5-year survival rate that is always bragged about by cancer centers. The other group, who actually received the turkey tail, lived an average of 10.6 years, fully 6 years more. We should know that. I think people who are undergoing cancer therapy should know that kind of information. Oncology centers should know it. Oncologists should know it, because they will often say, don't take any supplement while you're taking a chemotherapy or a radiation session, and that is absolutely unscientifically true. You can't say that you're practicing evidence-based medicine and then ignore it, right? It's one or the other. You actually look at the science or you don't.
Why aren't oncologists telling people to take mushrooms? Like, what's the problem? I mean, you talk about it, the science is there. Why is it not happening?
Education. The way they're educated in medical school. I came out to Edmonton, Alberta to become a medical doctor. And after 2 years of pre-med, I went, I wouldn't make it as an MD, because I would probably cross some line at some point of whatever. So the point is, they're not trained to look at integrative therapies. And part of the reason I wrote the book was specifically, I've given a whole swack of those books away to oncology centers, hoping people will read them, right? Lead a horse to water, but you can't make them think, right?
Right. No, it's so interesting. I feel like we're at the time where it's changing.
It is changing, absolutely. And I think some of the younger physicians that I talk to and do courses for and with, they're way more open, and they're understanding a lot that there is a place for very strong pharmaceuticals, but there's also a place for helping people learn how to take care and educate so that they eat better, and they look at what they surround their lifestyle with, so that they actually don't have to rely on end-of-life kind of medications. They can actually promote their own well-being through the use of good foods, adding mushrooms into your diet. I mean, 2 meals of oyster mushrooms a week is as good as any of the statin drugs for keeping cholesterol levels low. I mean, that's a good, and they're delicious, right? So why not?
We're going to collect some of those on the way out, for sure.
Yeah, we saw some on the way in here. Absolutely.
We did.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do another video on the topic of modern medicine versus natural medicine. And so you're talking about it there. Maybe we can sum it up in a similar or different way. What do you think the differences are between the approach of modern medicine versus natural medicine? What are the benefits of each? You can give each other some credit, and then like where should we be?
Well, I think the difference is this, that the biomedical model suggests that the body needs help, that it can't heal itself. And the natural world believes that the body can heal itself, mind-body can heal, a type of vitalism where given the right conditions, the body is a self-regulating homeostatic being and will always come to balance if given the opportunity. Biomedicine thinks that they need to suppress particular conditions in the body because that's the way they're trained. And there is a problem. I wrote a book many years ago called Rejuvenate Your Brain Naturally, in which one of the chapters regards the massive use of anticholinergic drugs in over-the-counter medications. So Tylenol PM for sleeping, antacids, antidepressants, anti-anxieties, Xanax. There's so many antihistamines, like for Sudafed for allergies, etc. Anticholinergic drugs. Think about this. Your brain, in order to fire properly, the neurons, has to have acetylcholine, choline. And if you suppress by using anticholinergic drugs, you suppress that process. And people wonder why we have so many brain health issues. Gee, what a surprise. And so what I would say is that individuals should pay attention to this. They took a group of 20 university students, aged 20 to 24 in Quebec, province of Canada, and they gave one group an anticholinergic drug, like an antihistamine. And then before they took the drug, they gave them an IQ type test. And 10 days later, they had already slipped 7% in 10 days. Young people. And some people, a lot of people in our society, middle-aged and older, are taking a number of these anticholinergic drugs for months and years. Gee whiz, what a problem. So yeah, I think there is a big issue. And unfortunately, insurance companies like to back and support the MD approach, and people who are supportive of promoting and encouraging natural approaches, people have to pay money out of their own pocket to go to those. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, I'm 100% believer that, well, I love the idea of pulling natural medicines in. And I think I think there seems to be, in this debate, it seems to be quite polarizing, and I don't know why, or maybe I'm only seeing those comments online. You know, there's tons of people who are quite anti-modern medicine,
Right.
but not giving modern medicine its due.
Right.
Like, you know, what are the benefits? So what do you see as potential pitfalls in completely dismissing modern medicine? Is that what you see what I'm saying? Like, I'm trying to like, well, I'll just give you a good example. I know doctors, a lot of doctors, and they're quite hesitant of people who are into natural medicine. And I think, and I'd kind of rather you kind of give these examples, but I'm just going to give you my example because I don't know how to frame the question quite properly. I had a girlfriend who was, who got a pretty large softball-sized tumor. And she was, I'm going to go 100% natural medicine. I'm just going to like take medicines, which could have worked, but everybody was like really freaked out that it might not work. And she went to the doctor and just had it removed, and it was benign and it was fine.
Right.
But like, I see modern doctors sometimes giving examples of people who want to cure cancers the natural way and then die. Right. And use that as a way to dismiss the whole thing.
Right.
So maybe you could kind of address that whole.
Well, every hour, 19 people die taking prescription drugs as directed. As directed. So there's one side of it. The other side is, if I had a tumor, I would have surgery the next day if I could, right? I think there needs to be a more frank discussion among individuals about the proper places for things. For example, modern medicine is amazing with their surgical advancements, unbelievable. But the actual use of suppressing symptom drugs has led us to, for acute conditions, has led to a chronic condition in many, many people. So that's where I differ, is that it's a matter of don't throw everything out, but let's use the best of all worlds. That's what I would really love to see, and that's what true integrative medicine is. But there's a problem, and here's the problem. I was sitting at a cocktail party many years ago, and I happened to end up beside a lawyer. And she asked what I was doing, and she said, oh, yeah, I'm an herbalist. She says, do you want to know why medical doctors don't want to know about natural products or natural health? And I said, yeah, I'd really like to know. She said in legalese, there's a term called informed consent. And what the implications of that are is that if you know that there's a product that is safer and less effective and just as effective, or if not more so, and you don't reveal that to your patient, you are in contradiction of law. So if you don't know about a product, natural product, then you don't have to say anything. So by choice, not knowing about natural products is the safer legal way to go.
Well, I could see how it could get complicated in some ways, depending how people are trained. You know, it's like, if there's this, here's that drug. If there's this, here's that drug, and it's just real simple. Let me know what you think about this. For me, what seemed to be the real insight for natural medicine is when it was actually with Amanita, when I started taking it and trying to figure out myself where my thresholds were. You know, like I started doing all of the process of boiling it down and extracting and getting a tincture, and it was quite complicated. But then taking it and ingesting it and trying to listen to my body, to me, the process of that was what really worked. Is like, now I'm not just like randomly taking something. I'm having really closely to have to listen to myself, and it was like a switch. And once I started going into the place where I'm now responsible for my body, that seemed to be the real difference to me.
I agree.
I don't know what you think about that.
I agree. In fact, early on in my career, and I've been an herbalist over 50 years, initially when I started out, because I didn't have any money and I didn't have an apothecary and all of that, when people would come to see me, and I go, okay, this is the herb that would be very useful for you, I would encourage them to go out harvest their own plant, prepare their own medicine, take full responsibility for it, and that was very effective. I mean, the trouble is in the urban environments, that's more difficult.
Good, we've got that. Let's get back to the mushrooms quickly. Okay, so there's, I think we've established cancer places should talk about turkey tail. One myth. Yeah. I think that's a huge one. What are some of the other myths that people have about mushrooms, particularly medicinal mushrooms?
Gee, there's a lot of them. You know, I wrote an article many years ago for Fungi magazine about a number of the myths that are associated with that. But I would say some of them are about the, for example, some people believe, oh, I'd only like to pick mushrooms in the wild. I think they're better than ones that you can get from somebody's factory. And that's not true. I mean, you know, we don't know, right here, we don't know if there was a landfill or a mine or some kind of petroleum spill here. We have no idea, because mushrooms are very adept at taking up particular toxins and heavy metals. And then somebody who really grows mushrooms organically in a certified facility, I mean, I don't think there's, I think if they're well done, they're both really valid. So people go one or the other. Other myths are things like, as I mentioned, are all medicinal mushrooms, are they edible? No, they're not. Are all edible mushrooms medicinal? Yes, they are. Yeah, so all medicinal mushrooms are, all edible mushrooms are medicinal, but not all medicinal mushrooms are edible.
Right, but you're ingesting them, or not? Turkey tail, because in turkey tail, you're ingesting powdered turkey tail. Yeah. So what do you, is that not edible? You wouldn't consider that edible?
Well, the forms that are presently on the market, like PSP and PSK out of China and Japan, they're an extract that was done from a fermented mycelium, and then that is capsuled. And so that's the form.
So what you're getting in the store, or when you're getting trad.
Right.
I mean,
well, trad doesn't
powdered and you can
no, yeah.
Extract, but I'm very curious, like,
yeah.
Is it effective, or?
So trad does it properly. So you can get a very similar to a PSP mushroom extract by doing the proper procedure and the right method and the right alcohol, like trad does. But many of the products on the market are taken from fruiting bodies of turkey tail or from myceliated grain, which doesn't go through that specific fermentation process. And those really are not proven to be efficacious. And so I advise people to really do the research. If they're interested in taking, most companies will have an 800 number. You can phone up, ask questions, you know, be diligent. And what are you paying for and what are you getting? So
it's tricky to know,
yeah.
Especially if you're at the very beginning.
It is. Yeah, and a lot of products are fruiting body and mycelium, and what ratio, because mycelium is cheap to produce. Right. But a fruiting body takes months sometimes to get it, and then to do the proper extraction. So yeah.
Is there a good link that just shows the best sites?
No.
No. Oh.
No. And in fact, don't ask me either. But yeah, I
go get trads.
No, well, yeah, I know trad, but I deliberately don't endorse any company because I want the freedom as an academic to really tell it the way I see it. And if I hitch my wagon to a particular company, I'm going to lose credibility. And so I don't want to do that. And I don't have to do that,
totally,
right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Let's see. Let's just wrap up all of that we can think of with this, and then we call it. But I'm curious about all of the different mushroom myths. Let's think of it. Okay. I want to think back to a very beginner mushroom person. Okay, tell me. Here's one. Reishi. Is it good for sleep? Can you just start taking reishi every day?
Okay, that's a great one to start with. So number one, what people call reishi, Ganoderma lucidum, may or may not actually be accurate. That may actually be a European species or perhaps moved at some point to China. But many of the Ganodermas around the world, for example, it doesn't grow here in North America. So Ganoderma oregonense from the west coast, the Kurtzii or the Tsuge that is from the eastern forest here, growing on hemlock spruce, those fruiting bodies are rich in these beta-glucans and this ganodermic and ganoderic acids, and extremely beneficial medicine. There's no question about it. And that can be produced by experts, or you can produce some of those tinctures for yourself, doing usually dual extractions. But reishi has a number of qualities, and one of them that was certainly recognized by Taoist monks thousands of years ago is that it helps to calm the spirit. And I've noticed that reishi actually has a very calming effect on the nervous system. But I am not a fan of people taking any mushroom daily for a long period of time. That is, you don't want to acclimatize the immune system to become dependent on this influence. And so I'm a real fan of 6 days on, a day off. Take a mushroom extract for 10 days or 12 and 2 days off, something of that nature. And or have an array of mushrooms where you're switching up on a regular basis. Taking anything on a daily basis is liable to create a sensitivity at the least, and perhaps an allergic response in the long term. And you don't want to do that. We already have enough autoimmune conditions happening already.
So, well, and this is a good segue though, because we haven't talked about this. What about microdosing? Everyone is getting on the microdosing train, and that's kind of this idea of taking psilocybin, not every day maybe, but on a cycle that's quite often. What are your thoughts on microdosing?
Yeah, I just spoke the other night about that actually. I wrote a book recently about psilocybin, and the microdosing, many people benefit from it, whether they take it every day, which I don't advise, or twice a week, which I don't advise. I mean, people will feel better from it because you have to understand that psilocybin and psilocin, they're all molecules that are very closely related to serotonin. And serotonin is the universal molecule of messaging, of communication. For example, this leaf right here has serotonin in it. This tree has serotonin. Everything has serotonin. And serotonin is the molecule of how things communicate. And so people often ask me, says, oh, when I took 3 grams of psilocybin, it was like the trees were talking to me. And that's because they were. You guys were transmitting via serotonin receptors. And so many times when people microdose, what that means is they're deficient in serotonin. And tryptophan, which is the precursor to serotonin, if you took that amino acid with a complex carbohydrate meal for evening, so that the tryptophan doesn't have to compete with other amino acids, you'll get a very similar effect. You'll get a great benefit from that without having to microdose. The second thing is, if you microdose all the time, you might be better off taking a 3 gram guided with a therapist dosage, and then you wouldn't have to do microdosing anymore. If you get to the root of what the issues are of why you feel you need it for anxiety or depression, and you have, and the clinical trials are showing this, like there's hundreds of them out now, that for anxiety and depression, one single journey can really help shift people's lives around permanently. And that's what I think is exciting about it. And it's also why Big Pharma is a little worried about the psychedelic revolution, in that if you can do one thing one time, how is that good for market share? That's not good. Yeah.
It's definitely not good. Well, this is fascinating. Is there anything else you can think of that are like big, commonly thought of myths? We don't have to go through all those deep ones in your thing, but like I was trying to think of anything we missed here.
I think the heavy metal one is a great one. I see this on the internet that mushrooms pick up heavy metals, so therefore if you eat mushrooms, they're going to remove them from your body, and that's just not true. I mean, I've helped people with heavy metal toxification, and it's a very complex thing involving at least 3 phases of liver health. The bottom line is metal stored in fatty tissue, they need to be released and made water soluble for a very short period of time, phase 1. And then phase 2, get that out of your body as quick as you can. And there are a number of foods, a number of herbs that interfere with either of those, and you got to know what you're doing. So yeah, I would say people should go to a trained practitioner if they have a degree of toxicity associated with heavy metals. Yeah.
To me, it seems like the biggest one is you should avoid mushrooms. And that's such a basic misconception, but that's the like North American model.
Right.
Now changing.
Yes.
We can like dismiss that one, but then.
It's huge. Particularly people from, say, British Isle descent or whatever, there is a real mythology about that, that mushrooms somehow, and to some degree caution is advised, but there are lots of plants out there that also can cause you great harm if you don't know what you're doing. And so the idea that they pick on mushrooms, I think it's because mushrooms are so interesting and strange, and by the way, they're addictive. If you get into mushrooms, you're going to find that you just want to know more and more as it goes. So you're already warned. If you're going to go into mushrooms, be aware that it's probably a healthy addiction.
A healthy addiction. That's actually a good one. I've had a lot of people say that if you get into mushrooms, it's like you're going down the rabbit hole. I mean, I've heard like people who've never used mushrooms. Maybe we're talking psychedelics here.
Yes.
The idea that there's nothing good that can happen from doing that.
Right.
What is that? I mean, that's got to be a good misconception.
Well, I think that's just the way people were raised and trained as a child, depending on the household they grew up in. I mean, it's no different than, let us say, you grow up into a house that's deeply religious, and if you don't quote, and you get trained in that as a belief system at a young age, and you don't really re-examine that, you may go through life just doing that. And I will leave you with this. You might find this interesting. There's a Professor Groff, G-R-O-F. Are you probably familiar with his breath work and all that? But he had ways of a breathing technique that would really give you a basic entheogenic journey just from breathing. Pretty interesting. But anyways, he said that many people go through life and the way they view things is very black and white. It's sort of like a black and white television, right? The old televisions were black and white. And he says, and then as people start to explore their own sense of self and their spirituality, or look at religion and is that really what I want out of life? They begin to discover that they're looking at life like a color television. And then there's a few people out there who want to take it one step further, and they really want to, on a deep level, understand self and psychologically what is motivating me, why am I here, and explore some of those parameters. And those are the people who suddenly realize that their television has more than one channel. I have a Facebook page called The Fungal Pharmacy. I can check that out. I post things occasionally. I'm not a real social media guy. I'm finishing up a film this summer, hopefully out early next year, called The Cosmos of Mushrooms, and you can check that out. And I occasionally put another book out here and there if it's a topic that really interests me. My latest is called psilocybin mushrooms, the history, the mystery, the science, and research. So people who are interested can check that out from Amazon. And yeah, it's just keep in touch with me. You know,